March 2009, the people of Upper Hutt were gifted a collection of works known as the Pumpkin Cottage Paintings Collection. The donors were Ernest and Shirley Cosgrove of Akatarua Valley. The interview that follows is between guest curator Jane Vial and Ernest Cosgrove and was filmed at Expressions Arts and Entertainment Centre in June 2009.
My father was a petrol tank driver, and the only art we had on the walls at home and our friends and our relations were photos of Michael Joseph Savage and King Dick, Richard Seddon, and cherubs in oval frames. That was about the extent of art in our home. By the time the company that I'd joined had moved to Lower Hutt, I was getting some time off at lunchtime. I used to go for walks through Lower Hutt and used to visit regularly Lewis Pape Gallery.
Lewis Pape, yes. What day, what period was that?
That would be in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And I was intrigued, and Max was a very nice man. He shared some of his vast knowledge with me. We'd had mutual links. There were links that he'd worked in Southland and I'd worked from time to time in Southland, and we had mutual friends. And I decided I'd collect some art, but we weren't well off at the time. Started taking the kids to the Dominion Art Gallery on Sunday afternoons.
Yes.
The 6 daughters trailing along behind us, looking at New Zealand art as it could be seen in Wellington at that time, almost from the beginning to the modern day.
Yes.
Which is not possible now, of course. Yeah.
Really decided that you were going to become a collector, and you focused on not the colonial painting, so you weren't looking at the gullies and, you know, that slightly earlier romantic painting?
I think they were a bit out of my league, as far as the cost was concerned at the time.
They would have been then, weren't they? They were highly collectible at the late 70s.
Because of my interest in those, that I became interested in the Pumpkin Cottage paintings. But it was also moving out to Upper Hutt made a difference. I continued to visit Lewis Pape Gallery for some years, or for many years, up until Max Beer died, actually. And he probably talked about Pumpkin Cottage in the first instance. I was aware of Nan and his fellow painters, but I think Max probably brought my attention to paintings that were available at the time.
Yes.
And he was also helpful in that if there was an auction on at Dunbar Sloane's, he would suggest to me that there was a painting that I might like to bid for myself, which was very kind of him. There's 2 distinct parts of my collecting. There's the paintings that you buy because you like them, they're intriguing, they're for decoration. And there's the real paintings, the ones that have got some significance, or you're buying them for a real purpose. Later on, when buying paintings, I also paid a bit of attention to the associations of painters. So, for instance, there was Frances Hodgkins. I had her sister and therefore her father, William, and connected with Frances Hodgkins was the Pumpkin Cottage painter Dorothy Kate Richmond, and there just became this sort of relationship between painters that you could talk about.
And it was that impressionism which links many of these painters, doesn't it?
Yes.
And which is
what's
different about Goldie. Goldie was painting concurrently with the Pumpkin Cottage, this first generation of Pumpkin Cottage artist in 1892, but his work could not be more different.
No.
He was much more interested in naturalistic, detailed portraits, whereas the Impressionists were out there painting the light, in particular the light of this place that we're in.
That's true. Yeah.
Upper Hutt.
It's funny, isn't it, that the critics of the day were criticising the Nean type paintings and his colleagues in the same way as we criticise modern artists today.
That's right.
We talk about all those things we were discussing before, the biliousness of the colour and the formlessness.
Yes.
And the sort of desperate imaginings and so forth.
They worried they couldn't draw. They
Yes.
accused them of being incapable of drawing.
Yes,
that was the criticism behind a lot of the Impressionist painters, the Wellington Art Club painters, because while they were drawing, while they were painting, they were using colour, and it was seen as though they were incapable of drawing. And drawing, technical drawing, was so fundamental to the young economy of New Zealand at that time. And then, as we know, and Mabel Hill, Mary Elizabeth Tripe, and later Maud Sherwood, a number of these Wellington Art Club artists were also teachers at the Wellington Technical School, and that school was responsible for teaching them how to draw.
Yes.
And here were these painters mucking about with colour and paint.
Yes.
And what's more, it was weird colour and paint. It was pure colour. Well, felt to be unreal.
Many of them had the traditional people had a mindset which was based on the teaching of the Julian and other painting institutions in Europe that more or less had formulaic colour for sky and that sort of thing. When they came out here, the sky was different. And this, I think, is the thing I like most about Nean's paintings and the Nean school of painters, is the dabs of colour, the new colours, the intensity of the shadows, if you can say such a thing. That, the light showing amongst these dark areas, and colours that you normally wouldn't have seen, or sometimes even now, if you're a painter, you'd hesitate to use because you'd think they'd be out of place. But somehow, a green shadow on a face, for instance, who would think of doing that and think they could get away with it? But and also the fact that they painted their environment around them, what people were doing, and what they saw.
Right outside their front door, really.
And what they felt about it too, I think. And that they didn't go back into their studio after doing a sketch and spend months and months trying to put down what they think they should have seen in detail.
And suddenly, here they were asserting themselves as individual painters and saying, I am going to paint what I see in front of me. So there was no need to go up the valleys and look at the wonderful Mitre Peak and our magnificent landscape painting in New Zealand. The Impressionist painters were literally painting what was in front of them. And if that happened to be a cabbage patch, a chrysanthemum garden, so be it. Tess, Nairn's beautiful painting of Tess. Tess was a young farmer's daughter over in Partanui, Alice Jones.
Yes.
He actually quite fancied her. Apparently he wanted to marry her.
Yeah, I saw there was a group of painters that were having a great time doing what they liked to do. And I saw the Nairn people as coming out there. There's all sorts of tales about Nugent Welsh, for instance, sort of lying on the floor, staying overnight, they probably had a few wines the night before, with his bony knees sticking out. He was a very tall man. And James McLaughlin Nairn arriving from the train with a stake in his pocket of his big woolen overcoat. And there's a story about him pulling it out of his pocket, and the paper's all dissolved, and he's just got the stake and says, here's dinner, boys, sort of stuff.
You mentioned the train. You see, with the train tracks heading out from Wellington, one of the reasons they would have fancied Pumpkin Cottage area is that they could come on the train.
Absolutely.
And Nairn evidently was bringing very large canvases, like Monet. He was painting on the spot on large canvases. Somebody had discovered the area and thought this was very appropriate escape, really, from the town, I think, which is what they enjoyed. They would come out at holidays and weekends, and as you say, a great bohemian lifestyle, always together, sort of leering up.
Well, yes, there were some girls too.
I'm not sure they would have stayed overnight, though, I don't think. I think they'd come out on the train for the day.
Well, even if they did, it wouldn't have been the thing to say, would it? But this bohemian movement, and the Victorians in particular, I think they found it hard to take.
The rebel outsider artist, how it got its name.
Yes, there's many versions of it. There was a pumpkin on the roof of the veranda, there was a pumpkin on the veranda, there was a pumpkin painted on the veranda, there was a pumpkin hoisted on a flagpole.
And you and Shirley have taken more than just a passing interest. You, in fact, have donated that memorial to it.
Yes. I think it's important for people to remember these things. Seemed a nice thing to do. The river and the cottage are closely associated. That's the reason why we chose a boulder for the monument.
Yes.
And the fact the artist used to paint the river quite a lot. For instance, the soldiers' pool, painted by Garnham, was where the soldiers from the Trentham camp in the Second World War used to be marched across for their ablutions each day. The pool itself has disappeared with the realignment of the road, the river road.
That Darcy Nicholas painting is very eerie, isn't it? It's like many of his paintings that show often Maori figures looming out. And he's represented the cottage in a similar way.
Well, it's been airbrushed. Does
Shirley select any of the paintings in the gift?
Now that retirement has come upon us, it's some 13 years, we're both sharing more our particular interest, really. It's nice to have done this, I think, and it's an entirely different thing collecting a collection of painters, because they're not all good. They're all important in the sense that they were part of Pumpkin Cottage, and in that they enjoyed the fellowship and they were part of the group. But everybody can't be extremely talented. But on the other hand, they played a very fine supportive role. And these sort of connections fell into several categories. There were the important artists that came from it, like Nairn himself and Dorothy Kate Richmond and Mabel Hill and Mary Tribe and co. And then there were the secondary artists who were very good artists but never reached quite the fame, like Sydney Higgs and Nugent Welsh, Jean Mackay. And then there were the members that just went along there to have a dab and probably enjoy the fellowship of the group. And the associated artists, the people that visited Wellington from time to time, that painted with the group, that may have gone to some of their courses as casuals, like Frances Hodgkins, Margaret Stoddard, Isabel Field.
The Wellington Art Club was originally established by James Nairn as an opportunity for students from the Wellington Technical School to sketch out of doors. We talked before about how many artists at this time in the 1890s, 1880s were painting in the studio. What Nairn was advocating, what the Impressionist painters were doing, was getting outdoors, painting en plein air, that French term meaning in the open air.
I tend to believe that the New Zealand Academy of Fine Art was more of an institution about social status involving art than an institution that represented art or artists. And I think Nairn led the body of opinion and a very talented body of students that said, no, well, it's a decision of artists. They should be judging their own work.
They were looking for other opportunities to sell their work.
And they had people from the Auckland Art Club, the Mulstick Club, the Canterbury Palette Club, the Otago Art Club, and then there was Nairn's group, and there was one from Nelson, and the name escapes me.
Bishopdale Sketch Club.
Bishopdale, yes. And the opinion was, in the newspapers, was highly divided. The Evening Post critic said that it was actually bilious colour, that it was inchoate, I think, which means formless. Is that right? Formless. And that this was the workings of desperate minds, desperate imaginations. Whereas the critic of the New Zealand Times said that it was the local artist was fantastic, that this movement was fantastic. So there were two opposite attitudes towards that exhibition. There's many fine paintings and sketches by Mabel Hill.
Including your beautiful painting, the Akatarawa, by Mabel.
Well, that's close to home. It's just like the bush is. And sometimes when I'm travelling north from Brown Owl, you go through a part of road and you think, oh, this could be just where that painting was done.
But you're talking about James Nairn there before, and how he was getting how the Wellington Art Club was getting great reviews in the New Zealand Times. They usually had very positive reviews, the two opposing newspapers in Wellington. The Evening Post gave them hell, and the New Zealand Times reviewed them very positively. But did you know that Nairn was writing his own reviews of his own work anonymously in the New Zealand Times?
No, I didn't.
Yes.
Just as anonymous or under a
Well, he wrote under several pen names.
Did he?
Yes, and he was finally, Nairn, in 1895, got very rude in his reviews of the Christchurch artists, in particular of William Menzies Gibb, and Gibb was furious, and he actually revealed that Nairn was not only writing his own reviews of his own, glowing reviews of his own work, but it was he who was dobbing in the local artists down there, and he was furious. So it kind of went to his head a bit. The cottage, when Pumpkin Cottage was finally demolished, it was very controversial, wasn't it?
So I think it's a bit of a pity, really. But maybe a lesson for us all. That when things like this do crop up, that we get together and be a bit more active about saving them. The Pumpkin Cottage thing became very important to me after I retired. The people in Upper Hutt were very, very good to us. And Hutt itself had a bit of a reputation of being sort of Bougainville. And I didn't think it deserved that. And here was something in the history of Upper Hutt that we could sort of concentrate on and make it a bit more important than it was, that it was being treated. It's our history.
It's our history.
It's important.
Well, it's been saved in other ways, thanks to you and Shirley.
Oh,